I want to open with one big premise, and this is that I am very grateful to you all for having me here. It is by no means an easy thing for any kind of non-Jewish community to invite someone Jewish to talk these days. And I do want to say to you, please, it's not going to be during the service itself, but afterwards, please do not hold back on any questions. You cannot insult me, you cannot hurt me. As long as you're not physically harming me, I will leave this building and I will still be your friends. This community means the world to me. The friendship and collegiality of First Reverend Duffy and then Reverend Margot is a huge gift to my own rabbinate in Bozeman. And I'm very sure it will continue to be this way, no matter what is going to happen in the Middle East. So, I'm going to talk to you, and you see me today stand here without the traditional prayer shawl, with which I often show up when I'm speaking outside of my community. I'm going to talk to you today just about myself. It's something that I don't often allow myself to do in my own community. But thinking about what I can bring to you today, I realize that maybe the most sacred thing is my honesty and part of my personal life. As I'm standing here, I think most of my identity rests on 3 pillars. I'm standing here in front of you as an Israeli. I have an Israeli passport. I'm also standing here today as a woman and a mom, and I'm standing here today as a rabbi. And I'm going to explain to you what those 3 pretty significant aspects of who I am are meaning to me today. And I'm going to invite you to just listen and then afterwards ask me any questions you want to ask. I want to share with you 2 moments of my life, of each of these 3 aspects that maybe exemplify where I'm at right now. The first moment I want to tell you about is when I was 20 years old. I lived for the very first time in Jerusalem. And I was supposed to be there for a year. I worked in the mornings in a very religious section of the city with kids with disability. And in the afternoons, I worked with Holocaust survivors. And about 6 months in, I decided that I have had enough. I was so tired by the noise, by the stress, by the anxiety of sitting in a bus every day. That was in 2004. I just wanted to go home and get a degree in psychology and be by myself again. And then I sat on the bus again one morning, and the bus was turning around the corner on one of the dirtiest main roads of Jerusalem, and the light was bouncing off the Jerusalem stone, which is the kind of stone that the entire city is built with according to a law that comes from the British Mandate, which makes the city shine and very bright. And the light was silver and it was bouncing off the stones. And I looked at this and the flying trash bags in the air, and I realized that I will not leave, and that I would never leave. And I didn't. And the second scene happened a couple of years later. I was a student at Hebrew University. Hebrew University has 2 campuses, one up in the hill on the wrong side of the Green Line for the humanities, and one down in the valleys of the city on the right side of the Green Line for the science. So those of you who are scientists, you're lovely, and just go visit anytime. And I was living there for an entire year in the dormitories, searching my heart on how it is possible that I was living there, but I was. And I remember that I was sitting with one of my friends in the cafeteria of the university. He was teaching rabbinic poetry at the Open University in Tel Aviv. And we met every week to read poetry, and because we realized that we were kindred souls, also to talk about the rest of life. And during this lunch break, we were sitting outside. We were looking over the olive trees of a garden that maybe some of you visited. And my friend Ophir cried. He was a peace activist. He still is a peace activist. It was the year 2010. And there was a flotilla, a couple of ships coming from Turkey with goods for Gaza. And the flotilla had been stopped before being allowed to enter the harbor of Gaza and had to go back. And on that day, we didn't read poetry because my single job was to sit there with Ophir and watch him cry. I do want you to know that there are many Israelis out there whose hearts are breaking every day. The second part of my identity here is that I'm standing here as a woman. And like many women, I'm also part of lots of statistics that I didn't opt to be a part of. And in my early 20s, I was a victim of sexual assault. And since then, I did therapy, don't worry about it. And it wasn't the most traumatic story. But since then, I have been reading the news, and I have been watching what humans can do to each other, also through the lens, specifically, of a person who knows what it means to live in a very vulnerable and always physically a little weaker female body. And the news about what happened on October 7th, the news that came out right on that day, and the news that were gathered in the weeks and months following and then published in a New York City article, they describe unimaginable, unspeakable, and to a certain degree non-understandable kinds of violence against women. And I know that I'm not going to live for another day of my life without carrying these stories with me. And I know that the stories, and I won't repeat them because you can all look them up online, I know that these stories have become now part of the stories of the Jewish people. And we cannot forget them. I'm not only standing here as a former 20-year-old, I'm also standing here as a mom. I remember the last time that I spoke to this community, I was this big. And I was pregnant with my daughter. Having a daughter changed a lot of things for me. I know that I have an extra layer of anxiety about what might happen to her. I watch her. I tell her brother to watch her. I see my husband behave a little different around her. And I know that as a mom, if I would know that my daughter were somewhere where she is not safe, and I cannot protect her, and that at any moment, anything could be done to her and is done to her, I would do anything I could to bring her back home. And the third pillar that is meaningful to where I'm standing here today is the fact that I'm a rabbi. I thought some about the big differences about becoming a rabbi for the Jewish community anywhere in this world, and becoming a clergy person for almost any other kind of religion. And one of the big differences is that most rabbinical students in this world, we know we can die on the job. It is a very harsh aspect of our reality. And I think we're all more or less prepared for it, and we decide to go for it because of A, our love for Torah, and B, our love for the Jewish community. About a week and a day ago, I spent an entire morning to teach my communities the laws about bringing the hostages back. And maybe some of you do not know this, but taking Jewish hostages and then asking for money, because for most of Jewish history there was no political goals to achieve by taking Jewish hostages, is a long-standing tradition. And there is Jewish law about how much it's worth to pay. There's a question about maybe sometimes you should not pay anything because you will endanger your community by showing people that taking hostages is a way to apply pressure on an entire group of people. There are also laws that say, don't only look at the value of a person. Also ask, in how much pain are they while being held hostages? And make that a factor in your decision too. It's complicated. It is endlessly complicated. And not even the law can give a clear-cut answer. The second aspect of me being a rabbi is something that maybe a lot of you are familiar with. It's the book of Ruth. Those very famous sentences that are said by someone non-Jewish joining the Jewish people. Where you go, I will go. Your God is my God. Where you're buried, I will be buried too. There's something that we're taught in religious schools, in rabbinical schools, wherever we are, among the Jewish community, which has been historically a community of a religious minority. And that is that our community will go to great lengths to protect each member. You can't take this out of the Jewish community. It's sometimes wonderful, and it's sometimes harmful. I thought a lot about the words that Reverend Margot gave us on the way. Let's pray together with hearts without borders. And I'm standing here, and maybe you have picked this up at this point, with more questions than answers. But I know my heart has borders. And I know my work is difficult to overcome them and to look at the other side. One of my most beloved Jewish authors, his name is Amos Oz. He's Israeli and he died only a couple of years ago. He wrote a thick book about the pain both in his own family and within the first years of the founding of the State of Israel. It is a very moving book that explains a lot about the Israeli and the Jewish psyche. And very poignantly, the book is not called War and Peace or Light and Darkness. This book is called a story of love and darkness. Ahava v'choshech. And I've been thinking about this for the last 6 months. The Jewish story often is not a story of light. It is most often, in the chapters of our story, a story of love and a story of darkness, where hope is something at the horizon, where peace is something that we're yearning for, and where light is something that we encounter sometimes in very unexpected, unprepared moments that we then call miracles. And it's those moments that we tell each other about when we tell each other our stories. Later in the service, I will share a blessing, a prayer for hope for light and hope and peace. And I want this community to know that this prayer will come from my heart, more than it comes from my head. Because for the first time in my entire life, and I'm saying this with an overwhelming sense of humility, I have no idea what practically to pray for.